"65 years ago, this was the sound of docks across Britain waking up each morning. An army of workers, their boots clattering on quayside cobbles.
Dockers, tallymen, checkers, stevedores, hatchman, winchmen, samplers, grain porters, timber porters, teamers, tacklemen, yardmasters, shunters, pilots, tugboatmen, foyboatmen, freshwatermen, blacksmiths, weighers, dock watchmen, dredgermen, launchmen, needlemen, jetty clerks, warehousemen, measurers, coal trimmers, lightermen, lumpers. And just as you think you've named them all, up goes a crane driver to his seat in the sky.
These men were the engine driving the British post-war recovery. Exotic goods, people from far-flung places, and new, exciting influences from across the globe ebbed and flowed through the living, breathing, bustling docks in every city.
The docks was the city. It was the lifeblood. It was the pulse. It was everything.
Around these docks grew waterfront communities, a kaleidoscope of different cultures.
Maltese would be spoken on the corner, Portuguese the next street, Arabic, Somali. We were a community of seamen from these countries.
These were the first places to experience new styles and sounds.
Can you imagine there were 25,000 plus seamen in and out of Liverpool, bringing music and records in?
In the 1960s, as Britain underwent a social and cultural revolution, this world would be turned upside down by modern technology.
They've got 1,200 containers each trip, and there's not one of them been packed or handled by a docker.
Ultimately, these changes would lead to the decline of traditional docks.
I never thought for 1 minute that the river would stop as an artery of commerce. The river became dead.
But within 20 years, these docksides took on a new life. Today, they are no longer hubs of industry, but places of leisure, culture, consumerism, and for some, desirable places to live.
You go into Liverpool today, and it's a totally different city to what I remember when I first started work. It's beautiful.
This is not so much a story about the loss of our docks, but their transformation. One of Britain's biggest docks was Liverpool. It exported more than any other UK port and was the main gateway for transatlantic trade with North America. The city was shaped by the sea and depended on thousands of dockers.
Basically, every other house, the dad was a docker. You know, there were thousands of men on the docks. There was people walking or on bikes or buses full. It was noisy, it was loud, and just busy.
This busy waterfront was the point of departure for anyone and everyone who wanted to make the journey to America by sea. This transatlantic link meant there were as many seafarers in the city as there were dockers.
You dream boats, you lovable dream boats.
In our day, every family or every second family had someone who went away to sea. And that was the main industry. When you think of one industry with 20-odd thousand men working for them.
Billy spent much of his career working in the kitchens of Cunard liners.
I'd follow you, darling, to any shore.
In the era of the great liners, and by the end of World War II, Cunard was the largest Atlantic passenger line. Liverpool was the hub of the company's European operations.
The landing stage was very near half a mile long, and you were getting, those days, 2, 3, 4 ships, nose to tail.
Billy documented his voyages to destinations such as New York and Montreal on this rare 8mm footage using a brand new American home movie camera.
This is the original and the first movie camera I bought when I went to New York. In England, you couldn't buy a movie camera. It's a mechanical camera. You wind it up, and there it is, still in full working order. It not only takes 8mm movie, but it takes still shots.
Before the arrival of the passenger jet, these liners were the choice of travel for the rich and the famous. And Billy seems to have collected photographs of most of them.
This is Noel Coward and Debbie Reynolds. That's on the Queen Mary as well. Liberace, this is signing autographs for the stewardesses. Deborah Kerr helping herself to a drink behind the bar.
Seafarers like Billy returned to Liverpool bringing with them the sight, sound, and even the smell of the USA. This made a big impression on the city's dockers.
You know, on a Yankee boat,
You know what you could smell? Coffee. You could smell this waft of fresh ground coffee.
Everybody doing that coffee grind.
I used to notice the seafarers, you know, and I used to look at the quality of the clothes. Like, I mean, I was only 18, and I used to look, and you couldn't help but miss it. They looked really well dressed, and you could see that this was a really rich nation.
And there's a poser, just come home, posing in my wife's back garden.
These self-confessed posers earned a nickname among the dockers, the Cunard Yanks.
When we were travelling to join our ship of an early morning, we'd go on the overhead railway, and we're in our suits, going to work in our suits. And the dockers would all say, oh, look at these couple of Cunard Yanks, don't sit next to them, they smell like poof puffs. Because we had aftershave on and we smelled nice.
You've either got or you haven't got. Got or you haven't got.
Some of the lads in the market diner in New York, we were coming ashore at the landing stage in American suits. A lot of the lads were posers. They'd be flashing American dollars, and after 5 minutes in New York, they were speaking like, well, hello there, you know?
You've either got or you haven't got.
Along with their swagger, they brought back all manner of American goods for friends and family.
I was bringing my children beautiful American, my daughter, lovely American dresses. She was running round when we had a flat down in Smithdown Road in American dresses. People were saying, oh, God, she's like a little princess, you know.
Although its transatlantic link gave Liverpool's waterside a distinctly American twist, sailors coming into port from other parts of the world brought rarer and more exotic items with them.
Guys who went away to sea, they'd bring these multicoloured parrots home. I remember my nanny had one. It swore like a trooper. And when the priest used to come round once a month collecting, and someone would have to run down the yard with the parrot so it wouldn't swear in front of the priest.
Liverpool's transatlantic connection was the backbone of both its passenger and cargo trade. The volume of goods handled by the city's docks was second only to that of London. Its sheer scale made London the nation's biggest port. London's docks had expanded to handle the global trade that sustained the British Empire.
Perhaps the greatest of all the many assets of the Port of London is the group of 5 separate, enormous enclosed dock systems with nearly 36 miles of deep water quays roughly 520 acres of warehouses. Together, they can provide berthage and cargo handling facilities for nearly 200 ships at the same time.
By the 1950s, the enclosed docks and riverside wharves that made up the port stretched all the way from Tower Bridge right the way down to Tilbury on the Thames estuary, and they were handling around 60 million tonnes worth of cargo.
Once the capital of empire, in the 1950s, the success of London's docks centred on swathes of goods imported from across the British Commonwealth.
We had goods coming from all over the Commonwealth into the Port of London. So things like lamb from New Zealand, wool from Australia, tea from India, grain from the Americas, which actually was transported to this very dock where we're at the moment, which was the Royal Victoria dock. And behind me there, you can see Spiller's Millennium Mills, which of course accepted an awful lot of the grain that came into the port and made it into flour.
But warehouses along the banks of the Thames were treasure troves of more unusual items too.
The world market for ivory is centred in London. Other rare and precious cargoes are housed here too. Ostrich plumes, for example, to grace my lady's fan or her millinery. And here is the complete floor of Cutler Street warehouse, reserved for the storage of valuable carpets from the Orient.
Docker turned artist Terry Scales was a third generation of his family to work the London quaysides. He, like thousands of others, handled the cargoes in the same way that dockers had for over a century. It was hard, physical labour.
I was sent to help a crack stevedore gang to unload sugar. I thought I'd never survive the day. We had to carry these 200-weight bags out of the coaming of the ship. The sugar turned into treacle as you sweated. The treacle came down your back. It was quite the worst job I ever did, but it was incredibly well paid, and I earned £5 a day. I went home with £25, which was an enormous amount of money for that time.
With so much cargo on the move, dockers were in demand. While some items were harder to handle than others, difficult cargo provided an opportunity to earn even more.
Some cargoes, such as bananas and fruit, had spiders in them. If the cargo presented a danger to your health, there was an extra rate allowed, but this had to be negotiated. So there was a little sort of hubbub between the more experienced dockers and the manager, who then decided how much you should get for putting yourself in danger.
Although dock work was laborious, being a docker gave Terry the opportunity to use his artistic skills as well. A magazine produced for the Surrey commercial dock workers would give him the chance to illustrate some of the dock's most well-known characters. The editor, a stevedore, approached Terry for help.
The editor said, I hear you've been to art school. I said, yes. He said, well, we'd like you to do portraits of our retiring veterans. So I said, yes, I would love to do that. I did a series of portraits. They had just faces like tree trunks, wonderful characters.
The faces of the dockers that Terry sketched represented a type of worker that to those beyond the dock walls was seen as a breed apart. Dockers were in a unique position. They were part of a distinct and closely connected working community with a long history. Yet they also had access to the world through the global cargoes they handled.
Docks were unique because their quays would be lined with these exotic goods and merchandise from across the globe that simply wouldn't appear in any other part of the country.
But in Britain's docks, it wasn't just cargo that arrived from all over the world. People came too. One dockside community in South Wales embraced arrivals, whichever corner of the world they came from.
It wasn't David's day, when we docked in Tiger Bay, and the skipper wouldn't give us any pay.
Neil Sinclair's grandfather, a seafarer, made Tiger Bay in Cardiff his home at the turn of the 20th century.
Oftentimes, black seamen found themselves abused, racially abused and what have you, at that particular time in history. But word was already out through all the ports around Great Britain. Well, if you want to feel at home, get down to Tiger Bay, because that place nobody sees the colour. And so that's how my father's father actually ended up in Tiger Bay.
The docks were created to export record amounts of Welsh coal around the world, and Tiger Bay streets were built with the profits. But what made Tiger Bay special was the multiracial community that developed there, as these sailors and seafarers put down roots.
And I stepped out of 19 Francis Street into the street. Maltese would be spoken on the corner, Portuguese the next street, Spanish, Arabic, Somali, Malay, any language you can imagine was being spoken on the streets. People lived on the street. Our streets were like a communal living room. My mother used to say the League of Nations could learn a lesson from Tiger Bay.
Tiger Bay was a typical sailor town, an area of the docks where seafarers from every country could buy provisions, find lodgings, and enjoy their own entertainment.
Most ports would have some sort of port area, sailor town, with very, very distinctive characteristics, sometimes seen as dark and dangerous, as well as exotic and interesting. Not always welcoming strangers, undoubtedly, but being a place where you might meet strangers.
Olive Salomon met her future husband, Ali, a young chef from the Yemen, in a chance encounter when she took a wrong turn towards the dockside.
I've been to the pictures in St Mary Street and came out and lost my way. It's making my way to the docks rather than to the town. I stopped and asked this boy then the way to Queen Street, and he said I was losing my way to the docks. And we started talking. I think we fell in love there and then. We got married when I was 16 and 3 weeks, actually. We had 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls. Of course, when I got married, there was a great stir at home because the priest from the church even came and told my mother that marrying an Arab, I was marrying a heathen. And, there was quite a stir at home.
Shame and sorrow for the family.
The reaction of Olive's family was a common experience for women who married into the different cultures found in Tiger Bay.
It wasn't the place to go. And in fact, well-to-do families, if they couldn't get their kids to go to bed, used to say, now, if you don't behave yourself, I'm going to take you to Loudon Square and leave you there, because the boogeyman was there. But God bless them, they missed out on the most spectacular way to live. Honestly, they just have no idea of what it was really like to live here.
Tiger Bay.
Tiger Bay. It's just like a fancy dress ball. And those who can't say that they've been down the bay, well, they haven't seen Cardiff at all.
Even the silver screen was drawn to the animated dockland community of Tiger Bay. J. Lee Thompson's film of the same name opens with a sailor, played by Horst Buchholz, returning home through Loudon Square, the heart of the community, where we see gambling on a street corner.
Illegal gambling activity used to take place, so all the seamen would be there with their wages, gambling on the corner. The bobbies might come around the corner from the Maria Street police station, and then it was a situation of heads up, and dice would disappear, money would disappear, and people would just mill around, and then the police would come, and then they'd have to leave because nothing illegal was going on. And when they disappeared around the corner at Loudon Square, life went back to normal.
In a later sequence down by the docks, Gilly Evans, played by Hayley Mills, gets into a scuffle with one of the local boys, played by Neil himself.
And I was the only extra from the local community that actually had a speaking part, and the only person in the entire film that spoke with a Cardiff accent.
Who asked you to butt in? You're not playing with us.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not. We don't want you.
Why not?
You haven't got a gun. That's why.
She said she had a little bomb. It was a cat bomb. And I said, well, cowboys don't play with bombs. Anyway, get back to London, Gilly Evans. You don't belong down here.
I got a bomb.
A bomb? Cowboys don't use bombs.
Hey, give it!
Go on, clear up.
Now, because the tide came and went, every morning it would leave a film of mud on the ramp. So it took us about 3 weeks to do this 5 minutes of scene on the film because we'd have to run down there or we'd slip down on the mud or whatever, and so it was always chaos going on.
Give her back the bomb. Go on, give it to her. Now clear off and leave her alone.
The vibrancy of the Tiger Bay community captured by J. Lee Thompson's film reinforced the public's perception of the life of a sailor town. By the early 1960s, dock communities were well-established melting pots for different cultures. Transatlantic travel and trade introduced glamour, style and swagger into post-war Britain. And our global connections were showcased in all manner of goods traded with the world. But above all, the fortunes of docks across the country depended on the physical labour of working communities.
It was dirty, filthy, hard, soul-destroying labour.
Last year, dockers earned an average of £19 a week. The work often meant hard labour, perhaps handling meat carcasses, which taxed a strong man's physical resources to the limit.
When it's pouring the rain down here, they be staying down there every day long in the pouring the rain. And you work hard, what do you get for it? Nothing.
You couldn't get washed anywhere. There's nowhere to wash yourself. You couldn't get a shower. There were no proper toilets. A big sewage pipe with the holes in to bolt a pipe to it, you know, the sort of thing you'd put in the main road in a housing estate.
For over 100 years, getting daily work on the docks was an uncertain prospect. Dockers turned up in the hope of being hired by an employer from one day to the next, but there was no guarantee they'd go home with a wage in their pocket.
Up until the 1960s, the majority of dock workers in British ports were hired on a casual basis. They would be hired to turn around a ship by a variety of employers, including stevedores, shipping companies, warehousemen. There was an incredible amount of flexibility for employers. They could hire dockers as needed, depending on the volume of trade coming into the port, but then they could discard them soon after.
The post-war Labour government had attempted to bring some order to this casual labour system. They created the National Dock Labour Scheme, which added dock workers to a nationwide register. Registered dockers were permitted to collect a minimum daily payment from employers, even if they weren't required, as long as they could prove that they had come to the docks seeking work.
It issued every worker with a buff book about that large, which was called a brief. And if you were unsuccessful in gaining work on a particular day, you took your brief to the pool, which was an enormous, great hangar-like shed. The dockers called it the pen. During the slack period, all the dockers and stevedores would have their books stamped, and that guaranteed them half a day's pay. And then they report again in the afternoon and have their books stamped again, which guaranteed the afternoon's pay.
Managers appeared to have all the power when it came to hiring the gangs they wanted for their vessels.
A bit of a choker, you're standing here like an old dish rag, discarded, you're wanted, you're not wanted, and, well, you're here to sell your labour to the highest bidder, sort of thing. It is near enough like a cattle market.
You got work because of who you knew, not because of what you knew or whether you were a grafter or not. Because I remember my dad saying sometimes how Ernie Roberts is the ship's boss, he was a neighbour. I'll probably get work today.
You can see them coming across now, they pick their gangs up, Say, pick your gang up, Jack, your gang, Joe, and the odd men, they pick up theirself.
But dockers found ways to manipulate the system too, ensuring they got the best jobs on offer.
A fella comes down in the pen, he sees all these faces, and he's got to hire, say 150 men to disload the ship, to charge the ship. Now, he wants the people who can do the job. And the fella would touch you on the shoulder, and you gave the timekeeper walking behind, you'd give him your book, so you were hired. But you know what used to happen? As the boss touched the fella there, intending to miss you, you'd jump up and hit his hand with your shoulder, and you'd give the timekeeper the book, and you'd bug it off, because then you were hired.
Yet, despite these tactics, they weren't always successful.
Well, I don't think there's a lot doing here now. Well, the gang, he's got them 13 books here, turn around and give them to one of them men over there, the ship worker, and he'll put them in the office. Now I've got to go down to the box and see if I can get away down there.
In the docks, shifts were long and the work backbreaking. Occasional pilfering from cargoes was seen as a well-earned perk of the job.
Most guys were basically very honest, but whiskey in a Yankee boat was fair game. And at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's been thousands of cases of whiskey. They could hear people singing down below. And all the dockers were drunk. In fact, I'll say this about my dad. He came crawling into the house, and my mother went, "Yeah, drunken get." And he went, "Maggie, there was whiskey going at the Yank. Everyone was drinking it."
Hard graft and job insecurity led gangs of dockers to seek ways to let off steam.
Come on, lad. I've learned to lodge you.
The pub was a favoured retreat at any time of day.
This pub that we're in is open at 6 o'clock in the morning. There's not many pubs in London the same, only in Covent Garden. But in the old days, the dockers used to come in here a lot, knowing they might not go to work.
A marked drinking culture was a part of life in all dockside communities around Britain. In Cardiff, Tiger Bay streets were lined with nearly 100 pubs.
Each one was unique and had its own different atmosphere. Somebody would plonk along on the keyboard of the piano and everybody be singing along. And you might be playing in the street with your kids and the kids would go, "Oh, come down the West, get your mother singing." And so because we were kids and we weren't allowed to go in, we'd have to climb on the windowsill and look over the frosted glass at the names of whatever was on the windows. And then you'd see everybody in there, oh, and they're having such a good time, and you wish you could have been in there.
Dockside taverns didn't just echo to the sound of the piano.
Yeah, I got a woman.
Bars in ports like Cardiff and Liverpool gave dockers, sailors and locals the chance to get hold of new vinyl records brought straight off the ships by seafarers returning home.
We were buying records for ourselves. I mean, we were bringing the music back. We'd go to a place in West Derby Road, Marshaws, and it's still there, actually. And on a Friday night, you'd go in with your records, and they'd say, "Oh, God, can you bring me one of them back? Can you bring me this back?" You'd go back to New York or Montreal with a shopping list.
Many of these discs were still yet to hit the mainstream in the UK.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head.
That album has never, ever been to England, but the seamen were bringing it in. And one of the chaps that brought this album home, his name was Harry Chambers. And he lent that record to Jerry Marsden, who started doing songs off it. And he was doing a gig in Anfield years ago, and Bill Shankly was standing at the back. And Jerry sang his version of "You'll Never Walk Alone." And Bill Shankly, when he came off, he said, "Hey, laddie," he said, "I want you to make a tape of that for me." He said, "So I can play it when my team run out onto the pitch." And that, we believe, is how it came to Liverpool.
Walk on through the wind.
And can you imagine there were 25,000 plus seamen in and out of Liverpool and bringing music and records in. And sheet music. A lot of them wanted sheet music for the groups that were starting up. So they could copy the likes of Chuck Berry and those people, you know, Little Richard. And this is a group of the lads on the after deck, me with the guitar. Now, at that time, we didn't think anything about whether we were having any influence on anything, but it was only in later years that we found out and we realized that all that music, records, sheet music, the ability to learn to play a guitar, all came from the lads bringing them in. Ivan with the black Gretsch guitar.
This American guitar found its way into the hands of one of Liverpool's most famous musicians.
A knock came to the door, and this skinny kid with long black hair and black plastic clothes, and they weren't leather, they were definitely plastic. I believe you've got a guitar for sale. So Ivan said, oh, yeah. So he got out the case, said, here it is. And when this lad saw it, he was drooling at the mouth. So he said, how much do you want for it? So Ivan said, oh, £90. He said, oh, I haven't got 90, but I don't want to pay that money. So he said, OK. So he put it back in the case. And he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I've got £70 here. So I butted in then. I said, well, look, I had the customs receipt. I said, San and I owe you. I said, and come back with the £20. So he said, oh, OK, I'll do that then. So he gave him a bundle of scruffy notes, £70, and off he went. We never saw him again.
And that scruffy lad was George Harrison.
How much is that receipt worth in today's money? Do you want to run away on a cruise with me?
As well as being at the forefront of new music, dockside communities were ahead of the game when it came to the latest dance crazes.
Like, we even had the twist before Chubby Checker ever sang it, because Hank Ballard and the Midnighters played it, and so we'd learned to do the twist a different way than it came to be when it became more popular. But we were always ahead of the game.
Along with these American imports, Tiger Bay reverberated to other imported musical sounds, such as calypso and jazz.
The Annex was on Bute Street, and of course I was supposed to be too young to go, and I often got in there, and oh, there was a wonderful time. The music was fabulous, but if you couldn't get in, you go down this lot of alley and you could look through the window and you could see them jiving and jitterbugging. People down Tiger Bay could dance, I could tell you that. And then we had the Ghana Club, because when Ghana got its independence, Benno Johnson opened a club to dedicate it to on Bute Street. Dancers and the Bay Boys and the Docks Boys used to dress immaculately. Sartorial elegance, par excellence.
For all the liveliness of the music and culture in Tiger Bay, by the mid-1960s, two forces threatened the community's future. The coal exports that had fueled the docks' growth and made Cardiff a wealthy city came to an end. And the council decided it was time to demolish the old, dilapidated Victorian houses and replace them with modern flats.
All the people are happy and gay. They're building new houses in Tiger Bay. But why are these people taking so long? This keeping us waiting is very wrong. Hurrah, hooray, they're pulling down Tiger Bay. Oh, what a pitiful day when they pull down Tiger Bay.
But I could hear, when I was in my bed, I could hear the pounding of the pylons going into the square to build the forthcoming tower blocks. The strategy of the council was to build the tower blocks in the park. Since nobody lived in the park, they could build these buildings, and once they were up, they could then decant the people out of their houses, knock the houses down, and move people into the flats, of course. And that's the strategy that was put in place, which was supposed to be an improvement of our slum-dwelling conditions, as they told us we lived in slums. But for the life of me, I couldn't find the slum myself.
The creation of the new Bute Town estate produced mixed reactions in the community.
Wouldn't you rather live in a new house?
Yeah. No.
Why not?
The old houses are very much warmer and they take ages to get warm.
I don't like the idea, really, of flats, yeah.
What's wrong with flats?
I mean, flats for a start, all the kids are together, and I think it starts, like gangs, too many gangs.
Well, how do you like living in these flats?
Oh, they're lovely.
What have you got?
3 bedrooms and 2 down.
Where were you living before?
Loudon Square.
In what sort of conditions?
Oh, they were dirty.
You got a bathroom?
Yeah.
Did you have a bathroom before?
No.
Did you have any running water before?
Only down the cellar.
The unforeseen consequence of the new tower blocks was the breakup of Tiger Bay's sailortown culture as communities dispersed and street life vanished. But the changes taking place on the streets of Tiger Bay were a sign of things to come. Transformations in technology leading to new ways of working during the 1960s would entirely upend the traditional working culture of docks across Britain. The sense of optimism, booming trade and plentiful work in fact masked deeper problems within the industry. Working practices were largely unchanged in over 100 years.
This is the old way of loading boats. There's 13 men in a gang, 8 men down the hole, 1 man on the hatch, and he tells the crane driver where to place it down the hole. Then we've got 4 men on the quay, what they call pitch hands.
British docks were very run down. The ports carried with them this legacy of the past. They were very old-fashioned in terms of their organisation. Dockwork was still manual. Equipment was very aged, and it hadn't been updated for decades. British port authorities were very slow to modernise their ports.
These old-fashioned methods meant accidents were commonplace.
I was working in a barge with another young boy who left his hand under the sling, and as the crane took the weight of the set of bags, he lost a finger because it was trapped under the strop. Because he went into a state of shock and he was lifted out on a stretcher.
In Liverpool, Dory knew the dangers of the dock firsthand when her father was involved in a terrible incident.
We were down in the hold of the ship, and the hook came down on the crane and caught my dad's coat, and he was hoisted up, and the other dockers were yelling, to the crane driver, but it's that noisy down there. And before he could lower it, my dad's belt snapped or his coat ripped, whatever it was, and he went right down into the hold of the ship. But he put his hands out to save himself, and that's what messed his wrists up. But he hurt his head, broke every bone in his body. He was in hospital for an awful long time.
For dockers' families, these accidents had a severe impact on everyone.
It was a very difficult time, for my mum. 3 little girls, and I remember I getting a job in Holland and Wolves cleaning, and she used to go out at like 5:30 in the morning, and she'd be home for 8 to get us up for school.
Decades of inefficient and dangerous working methods went hand in hand with an outdated form of employment. For generations under the casual system, dockers had worked for a multitude of different employers from one day to the next. Following the Devlin Report, an extensive inquiry into the state of the nation's ports, the government decided to take drastic action. In 1967, it introduced decasualisation in docks throughout the UK. Men were allocated to a specific, regular employer and paid a weekly wage.
For half a century, a dominant issue in the docks, and now a major point in the Devlin Report, has been whether the casual daily labour market should be abandoned for the weekly contract that most of industry uses. The jargon word is decasualisation.
These proposals caused intense debate among dockers around the country.
Look, get this right, because I don't know where you are.
No, look, no.
Are we arguing against decasualisation?
No, we're arguing about...
How do you feel about decasualisation?
I'm all for it.
How do you feel about it? All for it. Well, what are you bloody arguing about?
There's no arguing. No.
Surprisingly, some were less keen on the new system.
Well, we call it freedom. Well, so I'll say yes, I prefer freedom.
You see, Ernie Bevan fought for years for decasualisation because he felt dockers wanted it, but it seems that you don't want it, do you?
Well, I don't think we do. No, I don't think so. I think a man, if he's a man, he'll earn his living. He'll keep his wife and kids. He'll go to work and he'll work.
It's strange you'd expect dock workers to really, regular job, regular work, but the casual system was so deeply entrenched in the culture of the docks, it needed a knockout blow that Devlin could give it.
But for many, including Doreen's husband, the guarantee of a consistent weekly wage was a welcome step forward.
By the time my husband got on the docks, it was a good job. They had better pay. They still had to fight for everything, but there was better pay. They had all-weather gear. They didn't work in inclement conditions, and they got dirt money, danger money, all of those things that my father fought for.
Stephen Shakeshaft, a local newspaper photographer, captured the moment decasualisation arrived in the Liverpool docks.
I used to love just going off when I had a few moments to spare and wander around a dock and watch the dockers at work. Take a picture of so-and-so. He likes having his picture taken. And we'll wheel a docker out and he'd pose for me. Dockers all looked the same. You couldn't turn up there in something unusual because you'd be ridiculed. They always wanted to know, when will it be in the papers, son? Will you get my good side?
Yet as the government's new decasualised system took effect across Britain, an even bigger threat to the dockers' way of life was on the horizon. In 1967, a new technology was about to fundamentally alter the way cargo was transported. Metal boxes, built to a standard size, could be fitted onto ships, lorries and trains in exactly the same way, from North America to continental Europe. The container was a disarmingly simple concept.
The docks at Felixstowe in Suffolk have grown in 12 years from a few rotting jetties to the third largest container port in Europe. The men who work here, about 600 of them, are highly paid and handle about 2 million tonnes of trade a year. And last year, the company which owns the port made a profit of £500,000.
The container revolution came in remarkably quickly. Within about 10 years, the container became the way to carry goods.
The container is grabbed out of the hold and within 1.5 minutes dropped neatly by Martian-like machines onto a delivery lorry on the quayside. Work is done by gangs which are smaller than are needed to do the same job anywhere else.
Suddenly, the ports that could handle containers, which tended not to be in the middle of great cities with road systems like London, those ports had an advantage. Felixstowe was an absolutely perfect example of that. And shipping company after shipping company began to switch their shipping to ship vessels that could carry the containers, these great boxes.
These great boxes could be packed, shipped and unloaded in record time, using unregistered men outside the National Dock Labour Scheme. In Liverpool, dockers like Tony had seen the container coming and guessed its impact.
Bob O'Hannon's, he said, I'll guarantee you, Tony, one of these days, eventually, he said, all the stuff will come in these big metal boxes and he'll just lift them off. He said, I'm just watching them unloading the things off there.
Because of this, the container revolution posed a direct threat to dockers' livelihoods.
Those ships, they've got 1,200 containers each trip, and there's not one of them been packed or handled by a docker.
Dock workers considered their work and their occupation as their birthright, and they weren't going to let that go easily.
In 1972, the threat posed by new technology and unregistered workers sparked a national dock strike. After just over a week, the Tory government declared a national state of emergency.
Dockers were leaving their home ports and travelling to these inland container depots and non-scheme sites, picketing them, blocking lorries, blacking containers, and just basically disrupting the trade of these ports and wharves as much as they can.
Although industrial disputes had been part of life on the docks for almost a century, it was rare for a single strike to cause disruption on this scale.
In general, the industrial relations problems were more localised disputes, often almost invariably not officially recognised.
National strikes were rare during Terry's time working the London docks, but he experienced many smaller unofficial disputes.
It was the little strikes, the wildcat strikes, which were a nuisance. You know, if something was wrong, some sort of hazard to health was wrong, then a stoppage would occur. Usually these little forages only lasted an hour or two, and then everything was settled.
For all those in favour to please show.
But 1972 was a watershed year for labour relations in Britain. The country seemed beset by industrial unrest. Groups from coal miners to builders to the dockers walked out to safeguard jobs, pay and conditions. The dockers' bitter dispute led to violent clashes and arrests, and this image came to define the portrayal of dock workers in the media.
The way that was portrayed was as the dockers as being kind of industrial bully boys, as this incredibly strike-prone group which was overpaid and very lazy.
Against this backdrop, the union and the employers struck a deal, guaranteeing an end to the use of unregistered dockers, no redundancies, and ensuring all container work happened within ports. For all the efforts by unions, management and government to protect jobs, cargoes continued to move from traditional inner-city docks to more modern ports further downstream.
The movement downriver is to deeper water as vessels got larger, and of course, more importantly, there was more space for new types of cargo handling facilities, containers and so on.
Liverpool opened its own Seaforth container terminal in 1972, but it didn't provide enough work for the numbers of dockers still employed under the National Dock Labour Scheme.
7:30 a.m, Hornby Control on Mersey Docks. The men are reporting for work at the place they call The Pen, a throwback to the days of casual hiring and firing on the waterfront. If it's a normal day, there'll be no work for 1,000 of the 5,000 dockers. But under a national agreement, the employers can't make them redundant. Jobs for life.
The actual men in the control this morning was 170.
How many of them will get work today?
About half.
Is it always that bad?
Well, there are times when it's a damn sight worse, you know. We sometimes sign 300.
By 1981, only one employer of registered dock labour remained in Liverpool, with 3,400 registered dockers on its books. The impact this transformation had on the working community of the docks was catastrophic.
The dock road was full of bars, and the seafarers used to use these pubs. They'd go into town, they'd be buying stuff to take home to their families, and all of that stopped because they weren't in port long enough.
The now obsolete inner-city docks became a ghost town, but this derelict landscape still drew Stephen and his camera.
When I saw Albert Dock and the South Docks, they literally did turn into ghost towns, and no one seemed to know what would happen to them or do, and it became very lonely down there in Austere. That's a picture here of a fisherman sitting there mending his nets in the 70s. He was left by himself. Everyone else had gone. And he was one of the ex-dockers. I suppose he was going there thinking about the times of the past when he was lumping crates about.
The dereliction of the docks also provided the backdrop for an iconic TV drama that exposed the damage the early 1980s economic recession wreaked on working communities. Boys from the Black Stuff presented its audience with a stark image of dockland decline. But further south, a very different vision of the future for Britain's docklands was being dreamt up.
In London, there was this real air of optimism that started, and the London's Dockland Development Corporation very much tapped into that feeling of can-do, we're going to create a new world, it's going to be fabulous. There's a really good scene in the film The Long Good Friday.
Our country's not an island anymore.
Where Bob Hoskins is travelling with some investors on a boat down the Thames, and he's showing the wasteland that is the Docklands.
That this is the decade in which London will become Europe's capital. Having cleared away the outdated, we've got mile after mile and acre after acre of land for our future prosperity. No other city in the world has got right in its centre such an opportunity for profitable progress.
A year after the film's release, Michael Heseltine, then Secretary of State for the Environment, announced his intention to reshape London's docklands. The London Docklands Development Corporation was responsible for finding a new use for 8.5 square miles of the former docks.
You had these vast acres of dereliction and decay. The land is owned by the public sector, by the local authorities and by the nationalised industries. And only when the free enterprise system is able to get ownership of that land is it able to do its job.
The centrepiece of the redevelopment was Canary Wharf, destined to symbolise the economy's new financial priorities.
2.5 at 4, what are you making now?
Britain was now ready for a different type of global trade, in shares and capital instead of goods and cargo.
10 years ago, it would not have been possible even to think in such bold, ambitious terms. And this is going to be the biggest commercial development in the world.
But why does it need to be quite so high?
It took many years for the redevelopment plans to be fully implemented, but along the way, London became a model for regeneration of other former dockland sites around the UK. The former docks in Liverpool, which a few years before had been the wasteland seen in Boys from the Black Stuff, experienced a makeover of their own. The city's original Albert Dock was reopened as a cultural quarter, becoming home to the Tate Liverpool Gallery in 1988.
It was a common theme amongst many ports that the docks and facilities that were discarded following containerisation, many of these areas were regenerated in the 1980s into things like shopping complexes, residential areas, and places of leisure. So there was very much a shift on the waterfront from being a place of industry to a place of consumption.
Yet the industry of the docks didn't die. It simply shifted to a new home, away from the heart of our cities. Although radically transformed, today Britain's port industry is as busy as ever, the second largest in Europe. Over 95% of the UK's imports and exports still pass through the nation's ports. But where once we could see all this, now it is largely invisible.
Up until the 1960s, maritime trade was on people's doorstep in ports. They could see dock workers in the streets, they could see fishermen going to sea, they could see the cranes above the dock wall, they could see rows and rows of cargo waiting to be shipped or having been landed. Nowadays, port activity takes place further downstream, out of sight, at container ports, container depots.
This is the face of our docks in the 21st century. Mechanised, efficient, and still at the heart of Britain's trade. But here and there, you may still be able to find a docker, though he won't be wearing a flat cap and greatcoat, but a hard hat and high-vis vest. In a small independent port in South Wales, Ron Yates is the third generation of his family to work on the docks.
My father, my brothers, they all worked on a dock. My dad worked there for 40-odd years. He started in the early 30s, 40s, whatever it was. I started in 1970. 65 years later, I should be retired. I'm still working.
Though there are only a few men in Ron's gang, they're still loading ships by hand in the old way. Just a short distance away in Cardiff, the waterfront that the dockers left behind has been completely transformed. Before the turn of the 21st century, the National Assembly for Wales and Wales Millennium Centre would take pride of place in the former docks. The residential area of Tiger Bay was engulfed by a much larger leisure complex renamed Cardiff Bay.
I was born in Tiger Bay, and as far as I'm concerned, I still live in Tiger Bay, even though there are people telling me it's not there anymore. And I'm thinking, how can that be? How can you be born into something, still live in something, and it's not there anymore?
And in Liverpool, the waterfront has utterly changed too.
You go into Liverpool today, and it's a totally different city to what I remember when I first started work. It's beautiful. The waterfront's lovely. Glass everywhere, lovely buildings, people living in multi-storey apartments, penthouses.
Britain's docks now are as bustling and busy as they ever were, but are no longer the beating heart of our cities. Now inner city docks are not places for hard physical labour, but spaces to relax. They may no longer ring to the footsteps of an army of dockers labouring over their cargo, but they still hum with the chatter of millions of us who today choose to live, work and play down the docks.